World War II with Tom Hanks, a new 20-part series produced by the History Channel, is a landmark documentary event told over 20 hours. The National WWII Museum in New Orleans was proud to partner with the History Channel on this comprehensive documentary series. The museum hosted an exclusive screening of the first episode, followed by a conversation between Dr. Rob Citino and me, Kirk Saduski, from Playtone. Rob.
Kirk.
The question always comes up, why now? Before you answer, I'll give you what I think is the answer.
Sure.
Why always? Because as Tom said, World War II is the largest event in human history. So why now?
It's I'm moved by this. I worked on this for 2 years, and this is the first time I've seen the whole episode. It's frightening to see yourself that large on screen. But why now? We have an answer at the museum, and it really was brought home to me during the years I was privileged to work here. And that's the veterans generation. You know, 16 million Americans put on a uniform in the course of World War II. And the country was nowhere near as large as it is today. There were 125, give or take, million Americans. So 1 out of every 8. And that generation, of course, nature taking its toll, has been passing from the scene. When I started at the museum in 2016, became the Samuels and Murray Stone Senior Historian, Stephen always gave me a lot of grief about the length of my titles. I needed a placard, a name tag, didn't do it. When I started here, there were still about 500,000 veterans alive. And today, if I'm checking my recent figures, we're under 100,000. If you were 20 in 1945, which is about standard for a soldier, you are, of course, 100 today, and the actuarial tables being what they are, that generation is leaving us. And so World War II, Kirk, is about to pass from memory into history. It's no longer living memory, people telling you what happened to them. It's words on a page, perhaps, or images on a screen. And so I think this is the perfect time. And what better tribute to that veterans generation than to have a sumptuous 20-episode TV series. I thought I died and went to heaven when I was asked to work on this project. And I suddenly became a 12-year-old again. You know, it was when I first started reading about this stuff. And I remember the folks I was working with at the History Channel and the various production companies said, we'll only need you for about an hour a week. And it turned into just a little more than an hour a week.
A little bit more
I'll
than
say
that.
But what a great 2 years of my life, and I'm really, really proud to have worked at this museum and proud to have been part of this series.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Two more names I want to recognize, both attached to the museum. One, Rich Frank, who a lot of you know, of course. Rich informally was extraordinarily helpful to me and Liz. Some of the when we get to, and we want to talk more about what's coming up in the series, but as you guys know, his specialty is the Pacific, and when we were looking at those episodes, he was just invaluable. And the other person who really is the godfather of all of this, who is tangentially attached, Eli and his team very consciously talked from the beginning, at least from the moment that they asked Playtone to get involved, about doing an updated version of The World at War, which really has been the gold standard, but was made in 1973. And Meredith Richards pointed out last night to me that there's really only one historian in The World at War, and that's Stephen Ambrose. So from that, back in 1973, his dream to tell the story of World War II.
You know, everyone else in that original World at War was a participant. German and Soviet officers, American commanders. I think Field Marshal Montgomery is in it, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in the 26 episodes. Every single commentator participated in the war. But the makers of that series also knew they wanted one more contemporary analyst who was already had already made his bones as a historian of World War II, and that was Stephen Ambrose, who then founded this museum.
So I think he's up there watching somehow.
I think
it's come back around. So Stephen, God bless.
Yeah, God bless.
Let's Rob, let's talk about the scope, because we talk about the World of War. Let's talk about the scope and scale of this project. The Pacific, the Atlantic, the European theater, the Pacific theater, the Asian theater, the CBI is well represented. Talk about the scale and scope of this series.
Yeah, this is the full Monty on World War II. There's nothing missing. I mean, I think from the beginning, everyone involved in this project knew, I mean, how many shots do you get to make a 20-part series on World War II? And let's make this definitive. Let's make this the most comprehensive version we can. So you kind of took us through the theaters. There's the ETO, the European theater. There's the PTO, the Pacific theater. There are what are often ignored in discussions of World War II, the North African theater, particularly after American and British forces land in Operation Torch. You mentioned the CBI, and I'm glad you did, the China, Burma, India theater. I've personally, at the museum, and many other folks who work here, have talked to veterans of the CBI, and they constantly say it's like that didn't happen. It just doesn't show up. It's hard to fit it in. You have a single book or a single chapter or a single article. It's hard to fit that in. But when you're playing on, I don't know, painting on a broader canvas, could we say, with 20 full episodes, you want to make sure that this is as comprehensive as you could possibly make it. I can't imagine. Who knows how this will all be received? Or we're throwing it out to the audience now, and they'll be the ultimate judges. They always are. But one thing no one is going to be able to say is, boy, they missed a big part of that story. I just don't think that's going to happen. If you feel that way, you write me a letter and we'll talk.
Well, and I will say, I mean, part of You're So Right, Rob, and one of the episodes, and this is just almost never shown, is the home front on the Axis side. Mm-hmm. What was it like in Japan? What was it like in Germany during the war? And it's, of course, illuminating, and there's similarities between the two and vast differences. Rob, historical consultant. I mean, we hear that term. Yeah. How did that work? How did that work with the network and the producers and from the start?
It took me an hour a week. No, I've already spoken my piece on that. I was asked, I would say this, and I think my friends in the History Channel are going to love what I'm about to say. I was asked every question under the sun. And what was the home front in Japan like during World War II? I had to say, I don't know. I'll get back to you. Let me think about that. These are questions that, by and large, American audiences, American readers don't really know much about, don't get a chance to talk about. We had enemies I'm using home team language here, the Allies. We had our enemies, and the Japanese and German people, in a sense, were our enemies in this war. But I think they've been hard to use this term, I won't say victim. I think they've been subjected to a certain kind of stereotypical approach about, well, they believed anything their government told them. And it's not really true. As dictatorial and as totalitarian as Hitler could be, or the Japanese militarists who were running Japan, they had to sell this war to their people constantly. And they had to sell it even when it went bad, when it went badly bad, when their cities were being vaporized one by one. But one thing that did not happen in either of those countries was a kind of morale collapse, where the people marched on the government quarters and demanded an immediate end to this war. And I think our series here captures that better than any other, or certainly any other television production I've ever seen on World War II. I'm particularly proud of that. We do the American and Allied home fronts as well. I mean, I think full living color version of that. But those sections on what was happening inside Germany, what was happening with the people inside Japan, I think are going to be eye-opening for people who watch this series for the first time.
And of course, we talked about the Atlantic, the Pacific, Europe, Asia, but also the skies above it all, because some of the best episodes have to do with the war in the air. That's particularly close to me and us at Playtone, having done Masters of the Air a couple of years ago. And so to understand, and I think this is what the series does across the board, is help you understand the unique position of, the unique part that every service played, and and the difference between the war in the air, the war on the sea, the war on the ground. It really does such a great job, episode by episode, by breaking those down. I'll say one personal thing. I'm connected with the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. I've been a narrative consultant there for. Thank you. And I will say that, and I got to help Eli and Steve and Mary and Kim, your team, to help tell the story of the Holocaust. And I never thought I would get that opportunity. And I will say, when you get to episode 7, it is good. It is as you can do in an hour. You cannot tell the story of something enormous as the Holocaust in an hour, but you can make it. You can hint at what it was. As Tom says, in that it was murder on an industrialized scale, but it was understood individually, or experienced individually. And I think the episode does a spectacular job at doing that. Yes,
well, I agree. Episode 7, definitely circle your calendars for episode 7. They're all good, but episode 7 is special. Yeah, I think you mentioned the comprehensive nature. We mentioned all the various fronts, and you've also entered. We're in the air, we're under the sea, of course. Churchill, famously said the only thing that really kept me awake at night was what was happening in the Atlantic. If supplies don't get to Britain, that war's over in a couple of weeks. And I think our series really does bring that home. We have the Holocaust, which more and more from historians is being looked at not as some sidelight of World War II, but as integral to the entire process. It's in many ways why Hitler launched the war, so he could pursue this mad dream of racial purity. We have the Soviets in full living color. I've spent most of my career as a scholar writing on the Eastern Front, the Germans versus the Red Army. And, when I was first doing that in the 80s, it was relatively rare. We're still in the Cold War. People didn't really want to hear that the Soviets had behaved valiantly in any way in World War II and for all the horrific things they did. But nevertheless, they played a key role in bringing the Germans down. We bring that out. I think we were very careful not to go overboard on new interpretations and try to stand World War II on its head. There is a basic, I would say, Kirk, and one of the things I appreciate about this, there's a basic familiarity to the narrative. No one's going to have their ideas of World War II radically changed by this, but I think they're going to be brought home, those realities, in a very dramatic way. It's what you said about the Holocaust. That episode 7, it brings home the horror, and I think it doesn't give every single fact, because you can't do that. If you don't mind, let me add this too. I write books for a living, and people always say, well, you write books, well, you get to tell the whole story. But you leave a lot out of books too. So when people look at an hour-long episode of World War II with Tom Hanks, if you're an expert on it, you say, oh, they forgot the Battle of Schmidlap, or whatever it might be. But you can't tell everything. You can't tell everything in a book. You can't tell everything in an hour-long TV. You can't tell everything in a feature film. But what you can do is make quality. And I think it's the quality that is going to really come home to people when they see this.
I agree so much, Rob. There's a saying in movie making that if you try to tell everything, you end up telling nothing.
Oh, okay.
So you do have to make choices. We're gonna open it up for some questions. I want to make one final comment, and Rob, I want to hear your thoughts. One of the things that Tom says in the open, and I think is not thought of enough, and it's to me the unsung heroes of World War II, and that's the parents. As Tom said, imagine you sent your children, mainly your boys, but in many cases your daughters, put them on a train, put them on a bus, put them on a ship, and shipped them God knows where, God knows for how long. Imagine that, how many parents there are today in the audience today. Imagine doing that, not knowing where they're going, what their fate would be, and certainly you're not keeping in touch with your cell phone. So you would have no idea at any given time where they were or how they were. So imagine, when Tom talks about stasis, imagine the stasis of the parents between 1939 and 1945, the emotional stasis that they had to endure. Rob?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good point, Kirk. I'll end this on a personal note. My father was a soldier in World War II. He was in the U.S. Army. He was on Guadalcanal. Now, we haven't gotten to the Guadalcanal episode, but you mentioned episode 7. I right now don't know the number of everyone in my head, but working on the Guadalcanal episode, my father passed away in 2000, and I gained a sense of closeness to him that I haven't had in many, many years. So I really had to think about Guadalcanal, not just as a series of facts that happened, but how to tell people about Guadalcanal. And it struck me that that's what my father had done for his whole life after getting back from Guadalcanal. Never told me any horrible stories, told me kind of funny, soldierly hijinks stories. Another time he got in trouble because he was a sergeant and he yelled at the captain because the beer wasn't cold or something like that. My father had a series of pugnacious Italian guy stories. And they always made us laugh, but he never really told us about the horror of Guadalcanal. I found out about that on my own. But I just want to shout out to Steve Ambrose, shout out to John Citino, an Italian who built himself a life in Cleveland, Ohio after what must have been a harrowing 18 months on the South Pacific island of Guadalcanal.
Well, and we say it in the show, there was a saying at the time, Guadalcanal was not a place, it was an emotion.
Yes, right.
Ladies and
Jeremy?
gentlemen, round of applause for Kirk and Rob as we bring the microphones for Q&A.
Thank you. I work here as a volunteer. We're always asked, why don't you have an exhibit on this? Why don't you have an exhibit on that? And Rob, you mentioned this, but the question I have is that it's not only important what you include, but what you exclude, because you have to. So I'm curious what the process was that you went through, even to get it down to 20 episodes?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. There's quite a lot of debate about just what would be in the 20 episodes and what was worth an episode and what perhaps had to be folded into another episode. By and large, in each of the 20 episodes, I would say operational detail, the names of all the divisions and all the commanders and the muzzle velocity of the tanks, and the precise caliber of the ammunition. I love that stuff. I don't mind admitting to it, but a lot of people in the audience do too. But that was, I think we all made a conscious decision that if we started going down that route, that, shall I say, rabbit hole, that we never tell any story. We'd have a series of facts and statistics and diagrams on a screen, and it would not make compelling television. I've spent my life in the scholarly world and at the end of my career here in the museum. And there's, it's a TV show, what can you expect there? But what TV can do is bring things home in a vivid way that an academic book will never be able to reach. So I think we always went for those telling emotional details at the expense of operational detail, operational statistics, unit designations. I mean, you could name every commander of every division in the United States Army, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who want us to do that. But that was going to be impossible given the kind of limits of even a 20-episode series. So I would say that's a big one. I think you'll notice that. Kirk has already mentioned one thing, too. We wanted emotion, too. So the personal stories are going to play a role, as you saw about the Polish people while their country was being systematically destroyed by the Germans. You'll see that in every episode of the 20.
And I have to say, this is really where the network, they developed, as Eli said, like 3 years ago. So there were essentially two different large teams. There was a team led by Steve Conde, as I mentioned, for the first 10 episodes. And then the second 10 episodes, Andy Seastat, who is here with us. That's an unappreciated part of the art of storytelling on film, is breaking it up. How, choosing, some things are obvious. You're going to do Pearl Harbor. You're going to do Guadalcanal, of course. But it's exactly how to do that in a dramatically comprehensive way. And I promise you that's not easy. And I know how long you guys worked on it. I know how long and hard that is how do you break it up into chapters? How will this tell a particular story, but how will it contribute to the overall story? So hats off to you guys. Hats off.
Agree.
Hi, I just had a question regarding, obviously, an event as big as World War II has a lot of events that happened decades prior that are small threads that lead to a conflict like this. I just wanted to ask, what is something, or how difficult is it to set up a series as detailed as this without going off on a tangent on those decades prior that setup?
That's a good question. As a historian, my original sin is I always want to keep going back. Everything begins in the Garden of Eden, and then and comes forward, and you had 1,000 pages of prose before you get to your ostensible topic. And so I think you saw a pretty good example of it here. That we gave due to the end of World War I. We gave due to the Treaty of Versailles. I have a rather long disquisition, at least as far as these go, on the Treaty of Versailles, my little segment there. But we just had to move on. You want to get to the point. What do we say? Cut to the chase. If the first show was called Poland 1939, you can't spend half of the time talking about the historic relations between the Germans and the Poles going back to the Middle Ages, as much as, that's a fascinating story. So I think that process of sort of internal editing is present in every single one of the episodes. We haven't gotten America into the war yet, and we'll see a bit more of that, and shall we say, the run-up to Pearl Harbor. But it's always a tough call.
Part of it is having trust in you guys. Because at some point, you do have to have a beginning, and you can't keep going back. And you can't, at some point, but will the audience understand? Will they get the connection? And you have to, in many cases, you do have to make it plain and help and draw those connections. But there's also a point when you have trust that the audience will come into it with a certain amount of knowledge, certainly with a certain amount of curiosity. And so one of the things we love to say at Playtone, will the audience, they can look it up. And it's important. That's, in fact, in some ways, we look at it, we've done our job if you now have 10 questions. Then we've done our job.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this special evening. Round of applause for Kirk Saduski, Rob Citino, and the whole team at the History Channel. Be sure to tune in Monday, Memorial Day, to the History Channel for the broadcast premiere. Thank you and have a safe night.